All right, good morning, everybody. Back for another episode of Pick and Pop here to talk about the remainder of both of the conference final series. We have game three of the Celtics and Cavaliers going on tomorrow night, with that series at 2-0 in favor of Boston. And then Rockets and Warriors will resume their series on Sunday. That series tied up at 1 apiece, with that heading back to Oakland, California, and the Oracle Arena. So should be two very interesting conclusions to these two series. Going to talk a little bit about how I personally think they're going to play out in a bit more detail than I did yesterday. First thing I do want to say is it's unfortunately another day in this country where we have to deal with the news of a mass shooting with 8 people killed at a high school in Santa Fe, Texas. All I'm going to say is that I really hope that something is done about this in the near future, and can't be blaming wide societal problems for this continuing to happen. It has to be a more practical solution of what are we going to do with guns, and that's going to be something that has to be addressed, or else this will continue happening. And it's been a bad morning because it's been on my mind is thinking about 8 children in a high school who don't leave high school, who get killed right there. And it makes me think back to when I was in high school and imagining if I was in that situation, either personally being a victim or if I was witnessing something like that. To me, that's all you need to do to think of how heinous and horrible of a problem this has been in the United States and has been for a little bit. And I just want to say something about it because I think that we're getting to the point where, with this happening so much, specifically with it happening to children in a school, the one place where they're pretty much always supposed to be safe, it really makes you wonder how you can feel safe sending your kid out to school knowing that this is something that happens much more regularly than it does in any other developed country who has taken the steps to make sure that things like this simply don't happen. So it's extremely unfortunate. My heart's very heavy for the families and the victims and everybody that goes to that school and in that community that's affected by it, because that's something that's never going to go away, unfortunately. And it's another day that's going to live in infamy in American history, specifically in this decade, as we're kind of in the mass shooting generation right now. So, I have nothing else to say about that. I just hope that something is done to make sure that these things happen a lot less, because for everything that's happened in the past year, it really is unbelievable, and it's extremely frustrating, it's extremely upsetting, and it's most importantly incredibly tragic. And the amount of lives that have been lost because of this continues to grow, and it's tough to process. But moving on from that, just definitely wanted to say something about that because it's clearly it's too pervasive of a problem for it to be ignored. And I don't care that I mostly talk about sports on here. We're all people. We are all surrounded by these issues day by day, especially in this country. And I think even in the context of sports, we have to recognize the connections that has to everyday society, and that everybody that is a professional athlete is also a human being with their own platform and their own personal life and their own beliefs. So those are things we do have to recognize. And I think that's another reason why I think it's important to bring things like this up, is because it does have a connection to sports, and that every human is affected by these individuals, and that certainly does not stop in the world of sports, as much as a lot of us would like to believe that they are a sanctuary from everyday life. And as much as they are to a degree, they are still very much so real life, and we have to recognize the reality of that. Moving on from that, though, and going into sports, tomorrow night we do have Eastern Conference Finals, being game 3 between the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Should be a really exciting game with that series heading back to Cleveland. The Cavaliers 6.5-point favorites for tomorrow night's game, and looking to get on the board in the Eastern Conference Finals. Last year, this was a matchup between the two teams, but they were completely different teams. Combined between the two, there are only 9 players that played on these teams last year. There's 4 on the Celtics and 5 on the Cavaliers. So both of them very much so new look teams. And a big part of the concern going into game 3, at least for Cleveland, is what are you going to get from everybody else besides LeBron James? And in the first game, there wasn't as much concern because of the game that LeBron James had, only scoring 15 points with 9 assists and 6 rebounds. But then he rebounds, comes out in game 2, scores 21 in a quarter to open the game, ends up with a 42-point triple-double. You still get 22 and 15 from Kevin Love, and you still lose the game by 13 points in a game that you really kind of had to win. So it puts the Cavaliers in a very difficult position, and it certainly puts them in a position to where this game coming up tomorrow night is essentially a must win. They can't go down 3-0. And while I do think that this is still going to be a series, I have a hard time believing that LeBron James is going to get swept. I think he's going to take a game, and I think it's going to be really wild if he doesn't end up taking a game on the road, which is something that he always does, and which was a big reason why I thought that this series would be split after 2 games. But as much as we're talking about the problems that the Cavaliers have had and how they need to get everybody going besides LeBron James, I do think that there has been a little bit of overshadowing in the conversation of this series and even in the last series that the Celtics played with the 76ers, that there has to be a lot of credit, not just towards Brad Stevens, but towards the players on this team. And it's so easy to give Brad Stevens a world of credit. I've been doing it, with these shows for a long time, just talking about how I really believe that he has put himself into the highest echelon of coaches in the league, that he's a top 2 coach, right up there with Greg Popovich, from being somebody that has taken so many setbacks, so much adversity with this team, dealing with losing Gordon Hayward at the beginning of the year, losing a key piece like Daniel Theis, looking in the playoffs, losing Shane Larkin back in the regular season, losing Marcus Smart for a long period of time, and then, of course, losing Kyrie Irving for the rest of the season. But they haven't skipped a beat. And I think the biggest part of this, and this has been a characteristic from day one, I think, when Gordon Hayward got hurt, was that they were really able to get everybody to buy into the same goal, the same message, the same culture. And to me, it's that specifically that really helps a team like the Celtics find their way into this success, because that psychological mental whammy that a lot of these teams may hold on younger teams that aren't as experienced really isn't there. I feel like they've had this us against them mentality the whole year that, I remember the day after Gordon Hayward got hurt, you get up, you watch TV, and it's right away, well, their season's over. It's over. There's nothing they can do. They thought they were going to go to the finals, and that just can't happen because they don't have Gordon Hayward. And that was the narrative. And, you think about it, if you're somebody on the Boston Celtics, you could not have any bigger motivation. So you start off 0-2. They win 16 games in a row. And I think Brad Stevens, that's where really the credit is because you're 5 minutes into a season facing the defending Eastern Conference champions in Cleveland, and then you lose Gordon Hayward, your biggest offseason acquisition. It's like, wow, like, what are we going to do now? And right away, it didn't matter that there were young players on the team. It didn't matter what the mindset and the game plan was going in. The system that was planned around Kyrie, Al Horford, and Gordon Hayward just didn't matter anymore. It's like, okay, we have to change that, and we're going to, because we have enough talent to win. And Brad Stevens did a great job of getting everybody to buy in on that. I mean, I can't imagine how hard that must be, especially for a young team. You're looking at guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Terry Rozier, who came into the season expecting significantly smaller roles than what they ended up having to take on. And especially Terry Rozier, who didn't end up taking on that large role until significantly later in the season when Kyrie Irving and Marcus Smart were both hurt, because it was even at the point to where Rozier was still the backup when Irving wouldn't play because Smart would start. So now Terry Rozier has that valuable experience as a starting point guard. And at that point, it was the mindset that they weren't going to be afraid of anybody. And I think just as much credit needs to be given to these young players, not just for buying into what Brad Stevens was putting down, but to put all of the media frenzy aside and just commit to what they were buying into. And I really do think that that's incredibly impressive. And it just makes you look at the players that are on this team and the amount of talent that they have, the amount of athleticism, the amount of speed. And they've really used that all to their advantage throughout this series. And I do think that you can expect that to continue to a reasonable extent. In order for the Cavaliers to win a game going back home, they're simply going to need more from their backcourt. And I don't rule out the Cavaliers starting Rodney Hood at the 2 guard. Granted, he hasn't really played a lot either in this series or in the series against the Raptors, But I think it's just a matter of getting new bodies in there and just trying to find something that works. And I think that may serve as good motivation for Rodney Hood, especially after what happened in Game 4 of the Raptors-Cavaliers series, where he simply refused to go into the game at the end. And I think a bigger deal was made out of that than what should have been. But also at the same time, I wouldn't rule out a change being made, even if it's Jordan Clarkson going into that spot, just trying to find somebody that can get into a rhythm and get contribution from somewhere else. Because they have now been put into a position where they need a lot of help. And I think it's become more and more obvious that LeBron James just doesn't have the weapons that he's had in years past. And it really goes back to not having that second playmaker, that second player that can move defenders off of LeBron James and, be able to make plays to where both of them are involved. And that was such a big role of Kyrie Irving when he was with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I think that's still become incredibly apparent that that's what they're missing. So you're going to need to see more out of George Hill, J.R. Smith, Jordan Clarkson, Rodney Hood. Those smaller, more athletic bench contributors are going to need to be the X factor for the Cavaliers if they want to get back in the series, because for Boston, defensively, they have the edge outside of everybody but LeBron, because the edge with speed, size, and athleticism belongs to Boston. And while LeBron James is clearly the best player on the floor in the series, I think once you move past that, you probably take Al Horford, you probably take Jaylen Brown with the way he's playing, or even Terry Rozier. And of course, Jason Tatum, who's been solid again in this series. And these are all guys that are young, and you can expect to get better. And then that's not even mentioning the level of intensity that Marcus Smart has brought to the table, who really, I think, made so many winning plays in that Game 2 against Cleveland. I think that you can expect that to continue, that's just another one of those unique pieces that Cleveland doesn't quite have. They don't have that, grinding, versatile player that can guard both guards and forwards. And we've seen a lot of that from Marcus Smart in the series, and I think you can expect to see that continue. I do think at this point that the Boston Celtics are going to go to the NBA Finals. I think that with this 2-0 lead, I have them winning the series. I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I think it may very well go 5 or 6. I would not be surprised if the Cavaliers tied the series up. But I think that the Celtics at the end of the day just have too much. And it's that if you let LeBron get his and are able to defensively shut down everybody else, who they have the significant advantage of doing so due to their size, speed, and athleticism, as I mentioned, it's just going to get to the point to where LeBron James won't be able to carry the load any further. And I think a streak of 7 consecutive finals appearances comes to an end this season. I got the Celtics in 6 for this series. Moving on to the Western Conference Finals, which has been so highly anticipated throughout the season. I will certainly say that there's been a lot of anticipation around it. We didn't know what the series was going to be. And a lot of people thought that maybe it wouldn't be Warriors Rockets. I was one of those people that was like, hey, don't put that in stone yet. It may be Oklahoma City making a run. You never know. And of course, if Portland had an outside chance, if they would have been hot in the playoffs, but of course they got swept. If New Orleans had Boogie Cousins, there are a lot of ifs along the way, but we end up with what everybody wanted, Rockets and Warriors, and the amount of anticipation surrounding the series with these two incredibly dynamic offensive teams, that's really been such a big part of it. So now with the Rockets having evened up the series and doing so in a blowout victory with the series heading back to Oakland, certainly the X factor from here on out is Stephen Curry for the Golden State Warriors. And I was talking a little bit yesterday about how the Rockets took that approach by kind of letting Kevin Durant score a lot in isolation and then making sure that they lock down Golden State's backcourt. And that was, I think, the best counter for the death lineup that I've seen in a while, because it's going to be tough to really limit Kevin Durant anyways. But with Stephen Curry trying to recover from that MCL injury, he doesn't look 100%. He's only made 1 3-pointer. He's only made 2 3-pointers in the series, 1 in each game, which is something that you typically don't see out of him. So I would expect Stephen Curry to explode. I do think that once he goes back home, he has this long break of 3 days. I think he's going to be in better shape, in better condition. And I do like the Warriors a lot going back home. They're incredibly tough to beat at the Oracle Arena. And it's going to take so much more from Houston. It's going to take more of those performances because we saw in game one, James Harden had 41 points and they didn't get a whole lot from everybody else. But you're going to have to figure they're going to need a good amount from both James Harden and Chris Paul, and that there's going to need to be at least two of those role players that give you 15 to 20 points, whether that's Trevor Ariza, whether that's Eric Gordon, whether that's PJ Tucker, who was outstanding in game two, Gerald Green, Luke Baamute, depends on the lineup that they play. They're going to need some other form of contribution. So I think that that's certainly something to look forward to. And I think that Houston will probably continue to employ the same kind of defensive scheme. I think that they're going to go relatively smaller to match up with the death lineup a bit better. So you may not see a whole lot of Luke Baamute, may see a little less of Gerald Green, but that means that there's going to be that much more pressure on guys like PJ Tucker and on also guys like Trevor Ariza and Eric Gordon to be hitting their shots. And I think you may even see a bit more of Ryan Anderson, even though he's certainly a defensive liability on that end. In certain situations, you may see a bit more of him. But I do like the Warriors in the rest of the series because I think at the end of the day, you can't really outdo that talent. And if Houston is just absolutely on fire, for the rest of the series, with 5 games left, if they're able to win 3 of the next 5 and just be on fire in that period of time, then that's incredibly impressive. That's something that it can happen. We've seen it happen. They've had the double-digit win streaks all year. They've been a team that with James Harden, Chris Paul, and Clint Capella all on the floor that they really don't lose. Those are all things, we've seen throughout the year. But now that we've gotten to the point where it's a show, they're playing, the defending champions, a team that has won the West the last 3 years. It's going to be interesting to see as a series now that it's tied, now that's going to Oakland. How is Houston going to play in these monumental games on the road? I personally have a hard time believing that they're even going to win a game in Oakland just because of how dominant Golden State is at home, and especially because Stephen Curry has been a non-factor in the series so far. I don't think that that's going to continue. I have the Warriors in 6. I do think at this point that even if Golden State wins these next 2 games at home, that Houston would be able to keep the series alive by winning that game 5 at home. But I just don't think it's one of those situations to where until I'm proven wrong, I don't want to pick against the Golden State Warriors. I think they're certainly the bona fide favorite to win the title still at this point, and I think that they're certainly the favorite to win this series. I have the Warriors in 6, but I do think, and I hope that it's a 7-game series. I hope it goes longer. I hope to be incredibly entertained because by a lot of measures, people are considering this to be the finals because it's hard to believe that either of the teams in the East would have a great chance at beating either of the teams in the West. But still, certainly 2 exciting series, and I'm very excited to see how the rest of them play out. One last update before I go. I know I was talking about album reviews the other day. I think I'll be recording my first one today. I'm not going to do those on live streams. That's something that I'll at least try and edit a little bit before I post it, but I should be recording one today. I don't know exactly when that will be posted, but that's certainly something I'm going to try and start doing very soon now that I have a good amount of time trying to get myself started to work soon as well. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Pick and Pop. It's been Peter Marzano, and we'll see you tomorrow.